emergency?
Yes, we just been robbed.
Okay, stay on the line.
Okay.
Is anyone hurt?
No.
The guy just walked out with I don't know how much cash in a bag. He had a bomb or something wrapped around his neck.
The man was sitting there as he was since about 3 o'clock when all of a sudden a loud explosion and he flipped onto his back and the state police troopers scrambled. They're still holding guns on him, as you can see. They're still not exactly sure his condition. It is apparent that he did have a bomb and he detonated it in front of the state troopers and the FBI agents that have been here.
I'm trying to prevent your movie from being a flop. I am not some evil genius who was greedy and wanted some guy to rob a bank from me. I didn't have anything to do with the goddamn crime.
Today we have a case so wicked that we are sure you've never heard something so diabolical in true crime before. Brace yourself for the suspense that will keep you on the edge of your seat. This is the story of a man in Pennsylvania whose head was blown to pieces on live TV, with a deadly note in hand that controlled his every move. The instructions that didn't spare him even after he successfully executed the bank robbery. Back on August 2nd, 2003, when Brian Douglas Wells left his house to rob a bank, little did he imagine that the crime he was going to commit would take a 180-degree turn and end up becoming one of the most bizarre and complex robbery murder case America had ever seen. At exactly 2:28 p.m., a 46-year-old pizza delivery man, Brian Douglas Wells, entered a PNC bank in Erie, Pennsylvania, with a cane gun in his hand. What happened next has left many, even 20 years later, pondering how the events unfolded that day. With all the calmness Wells could show, he handed a note to the teller, signaling to gather employees with vault access. The note he handed over read, "Gather employees with access codes to vault and work fast to fill the bag with $250,000. You only have 15 minutes. What added to the terror in this stressful situation was when he raised his shirt and flashed a bomb strapped around his neck. Despite the intense pressure, the teller could not access the vault, managing to fill the bag with only $8,702. Without inflicting any violence on the bank employees or threatening them with fatal consequences if they didn't open the vault, Brian Wells just took the bag, picked a lollipop from the counter, and departed from the bank. Following Wells' exit, a quick-thinking bank employee urgently contacted the police. Barely 15 minutes later, state troopers made a chilling discovery. Brian Wells, who drove off in his Geo Metro, was found outside his vehicle in a nearby parking lot. The troopers swiftly surrounded him, brought him to the ground, and restrained him in handcuffs, only to be met with a harrowing situation. Brian Wells claimed that he had been forced by some black men to execute the bank heist by wrapping the bomb around his neck on gunpoint. Desperation and dread hung in the air as he repeatedly warned the troopers, "It's going to go off. I'm not lying." Helpless, Brian sat in front of his car while the officers got their guns ready and took the defensive positions behind their vehicles. A frantic call was made for the bomb squad, while the media cameras, who were quick to arrive at the scene, captured every moment Brian spent on the pavement waiting for the bomb to detonate. After an agonizing 25 minutes, Wells desperately asked the troops if they had called his boss. The terror in his voice expressed his tension that his boss might think Brian had neglected his duties. The bomb disposal squad arrived some minutes too late. The unthinkable had happened just 3 minutes before their entrance. With a deafening boom, the bomb box attached to his throat exploded, tearing a hole and ripping Wells' chest away. In a matter of seconds, just before the eyes of police and cameramen, Brian Wells was blasted to death.
The man was sitting there as he was since about 3 o'clock when all of a sudden a loud explosion and he flipped onto his back, and the state police troopers scrambled. They're still holding guns on him, as you can see. They're still not exactly sure his condition. It is apparent that he did have a bomb, and he detonated it in front of the state troopers and the FBI agents that have been here.
The gut-wrenching sequence of events left everyone with questions that nobody knew the answers to. Who were the men who attached the bomb to Brian Wells? Was Brian really forced? Or was he an accomplice in the crime? Or was that just a made-up story Brian made in front of the police? And he actually was a suicide bomber. A flood of questions poured in as the police tried to navigate the investigations for the man who was murdered in cold blood in front of them. Born on November 15, 1956, Brian Wells was the hostage in the heist that took his life away. Even the people at PNC Bank were terrified seeing how Brian was acting up. It was as if someone was controlling every single move he was making. As the police sifted through the physical evidence, they stumbled upon a 2-foot-long cane inside Wells's car that had been cleverly transformed into a homemade gun. The bomb itself was a DIY masterpiece. It had a metal collar with 3 bands featuring 4 keyholes and a 3-digit combination lock, along with the iron box that held 2 6-inch pipe bombs filled with double base smokeless powder. The bomb was designed to physically suffocate Brian if he moved his neck. Even though it was handmade, its finishing gave away that the bomb was made using professional-grade tools. The features of the DIY bomb didn't stop here. It also had an electronic countdown timer and 2 Sunbeam kitchen timers with fake wires and deceptive stickers running along them to mislead the disposal squad. The police found the head start for the investigation in the form of the handwritten notes that were found inside Brian's car. The notes had detailed and very organized instructions written for Brian, as it was addressed to the bomb hostage. All Brian had to do was follow the steps to rob the bank. The investigators deciphered the next location hidden in the clues, but they found nothing over there. This led to the confirmation that there indeed was some mastermind behind the crime, and that he or she was following the police. Another fact that led to the confirmation of someone else's involvement in this case was the t-shirt Brian was wearing over the bomb. Guess was written on his shirt, which meant it was a teasing message for the investigators. The mastermind seemed to have a lot of time on their hands, the way the bomb and clues were set up like a complex puzzle. Alongside instructions, the notes and location maps, drawings and threats about the bomb blowing up if Brian didn't comply with the instructions. One of the threats on the notes read, "This powerful booby-trapped bomb can be removed only by following our instructions. Act now, think later, or you will die." The next clue Brian had found after the robbery took him to a flower bed that had a 2-page letter waiting for him. Unfortunately, Brian exploded to pieces before he could get to the next location, Peach Street, to find his next clue taped on a container. What Brian Wells didn't know was that the bomb was rigged the moment he would have tried to remove it. It would have blown up either way. The investigators couldn't help but scratch their heads behind the motive of playing this bloody scavenger hunt. Why, out of all people, was Brian Wells chosen as the hostage? And why did they plan it in broad daylight? On the night after the incident, Wells's home on Loveland Avenue in Mill Creek Township was searched by the agents, but no evidence of bomb-making activity was found there. Instead, what they found was the list of people Brian knew. One of them was a prostitute named Jessica Hopsick, who also had a part in the story. The killer clues spread like a forest fire across the country. The city of Erie was in the headlines with the ongoing investigations on the Brian Wells case.
Pizza delivery man Brian Wells claimed a man forced him to rob this Pennsylvania bank with a ticking time bomb strapped to his neck. It later exploded, killing him.
From investigators to federal agents, all had the same target in mind: to find the culprit behind the collar bomber. So, how exactly was the whole setup planned, and how did the investigators reach the culprit? Rewinding back to the morning of August 2nd, 2003, Brian's shift at Mamma Mia's Pizzeria was about to be over when they received an order from the outskirts of the city. Being a 10-year loyal employee, Brian agreed to deliver it. The delivery location was at the same TV transmission tower site on Peach Street. The day after the event, some reporters found a man named William Bill Rothstein residing beside the tower. The 59-year-old tall man dressed in denim overalls was an old resident of the area, whose backyard extended towards the transmission tower. The man had no idea why the journalists were so intrigued about his backyard. He led the reporters to his yard, but they didn't find anything there. Tragically, 2 individuals who were related to Brian Wells were reported dead following his murder. One of them was Robert Thomas Panetti, Brian Wells' co-worker who died due to an accidental drug overdose on 31st of August 2003. Following the lead about the black men Brian was talking about, investigators searched the apartment of a man whose girlfriend claimed to know Brian Wells. However, no charges were filed against the man. Coming back to William Rothstein, who seemed to be a harmless old man residing beside the television tower, was actually hiding a sinister secret. On September 20th, a 911 operator received a call from Rothstein. It didn't take long for the dispatcher to inform the police when William said, "At 8645 Peach Street in the garage, there is a frozen body. It's in the freezer." The dead body rotting in his freezer was of a man named James Roden.
I said to myself, I'm not going to do this shit because I'm not going to go through with it. And I had figured either like kill myself or turn her into you guys and then figure out which is the best way for me to do it.
He was wrapped up in a semi-fetal position and he was froze solid. The body was actually frozen to the sides of the freezer, so the freezer had to thaw out first in order to get him out. That just took a few hours and then we were able to remove him from the freezer, but he was frozen solid.
In a matter of hours after informing 911, Bill Rothstein found himself in police custody. He confessed to the cops that he had been in torment for weeks and even contemplated taking his own life, going as far as placing his suicide note on a desk at his residence. Written with a black marker, his suicide note stated, "This has nothing to do with the Wells case." In the letter, he apologized to those who cared for him and claimed that he didn't kill or participate in the death of James Roden. A new name surfaced when William was in custody, Marjorie Deal Armstrong, who lived with her boyfriend James Roden for 10 years, was brought to the list of suspects when Rothstein claimed that it was a Deal Armstrong who had killed James with a 12-gauge shotgun over a dispute of money. The reason James Roden's body had been in William's freezer was because Deal Armstrong had paid him $2,000 to get rid of the body and clean the crime scene at her residence. To get rid of the murder weapon, William melted the gun and spread its remains all over Erie County. The fear of what his ex-girlfriend Deal Armstrong planned to do with the body is what led him to call police. He couldn't bring himself to grind up the body. Hope you're keeping up with this complicated case. The main twist is yet to be revealed. Just a day later, on September 21, 2003, Deal Armstrong found herself in custody for the murder of James Roden. James was finally served justice when, 16 months later in January 2005, Deal Armstrong was sentenced to 7 to 20 years in prison for third-degree murder and mutilation of the dead body after she pleaded guilty but mentally ill. The twist in the story began showing its colors when Marjorie Deal Armstrong was suspected of killing Roden to stop him from informing authorities about the robbery plot. Fighting the battle against lymphoma, William Rothstein died in July 2004. Roden's murder wasn't on the minds of the federal agents who were investigating the collar bomb case until one day in April 2005, a state police officer dialed them up right after a discussion with Deal Armstrong about some unrelated murder case. Well, apparently William Rothstein's suicide note was deceptive. Unlike his claim of nothing to do with the Wells case, the murder of James Roden was indeed linked with the collar bomb mystery. When the Fed sat down with Deal Armstrong, she offered to reveal everything she knew about the Brian Wells case in exchange for a transfer from Muncie State Penitentiary to the minimum security prison in Cambridge Spring near Erie. Deal Armstrong was a notorious woman famous for the list of her deceased lovers in Erie. This was way before she was arrested for the murder of James Roden. In 1984, at the age of 35 years, she was charged with murdering Robert Thomas, her boyfriend, by shooting him 6 times. Surprisingly, the jury left her off the hook as she claimed the attack was in self-defense. Then in 1988, her husband Richard Armstrong lost his life to a cerebral hemorrhage caused by a head injury. Despite the suspicious inflicted wound upon his head, the death case of Richard Armstrong never saw the light of the coroner's office. The facts Deal Armstrong shared about the Brian Wells case were more than sufficient to let the federal investigators realize that she was the mastermind they had been looking for. Deal Armstrong owned up to supplying the kitchen timers for the bomb and admitted that she was present just a mile away from the bank. But the most surprising turn of events was her revelation of Brian Wells, that he wasn't just a hostage, but a part of the plan. Not to forget Rothstein, who according to her was the main one behind the grand plan. While she was busy blaming the late Rothstein, she didn't realize that her stories were indirectly incriminating herself.
And Bill Rothstein is a filthy liar that's going to get sued. They're going to get a negligence suit filed by me from my jail cell if necessary.
Moreover, the claims of 4 different informants about Diehl Armstrong's discussion of crime in details cemented the investigators' belief that they had got the real culprit. According to one of the informant's conversation notes, she was the one who took Brian's neck size for the bomb, and James Roden was killed because he got to know about the heist. The court records later revealed that Diehl Armstrong had bipolar disorder. Since her high school days, she was a smart kid, but as soon as she grew up, her intellectual brilliance turned into a narcissistic and aggressive personality. Discovery of a staggering 400 pounds of butter and over 700 pounds of cheese, all decomposed in her house in 1984, led to psychiatric assessments which called her mentally unfit, but the judge of Thomas' case ruled her fit to stand trial. The investigation of this complicated case found another break later in 2005 when Kenneth Barnes entered into the equation. The TV repairman turned crack dealer was an old fishing friend of Diehl Armstrong who had been in jail for some time on irrelevant drug charges. With the glimmer of hope of a reduced sentence, Barnes agreed to spill whatever he knew of the murderous heist. Barnes left no stone unturned to convince the federal agents that Diehl Armstrong orchestrated the entire collar bomb incident. With the cash stolen from the bank, she planned to kill her father, who was recklessly spending the money she was supposed to inherit. Kenneth Barnes further revealed that on August 27, 2003, he, along with Diehl Armstrong, Rothstein, Stockton, and Bryant gathered to discuss the bank robbery plan. Floyd Arthur J. Stockton Jr. was a convicted rapist who lived in William Rothstein's house. Stockton was given immunity to testify against Diehl Armstrong, but his illness didn't allow him to give his testimony in court. Remember the clues that vanished after Brian Wells' death? Diehl Armstrong and Barnes were present there. They even watched through binoculars as Brian exploded. The layers of evil in this story are never ending. Barnes' story helped investigators fill the gaps they had already anticipated and heard. According to Barnes, he didn't know the entire heist plus murder plan. At last, the investigation was picking up momentum. In 2006, along with her attorney, Diehl Armstrong was brought back to the FBI special agents, who gave her the bad news that they had enough evidence against her. When Diehl Armstrong got to know about Barnes' accusation of meeting him on August 27th and 28th, 2003, she was furious. Started shouting and slammed her fist on the conference table, but bizarrely, she continued the conversation even after such an explosive outburst. The woman, who just couldn't keep quiet, had already spilled more details than she probably intended. She agreed to drive around Erie to point out her locations on the day of the heist. But suddenly, she was reminded that she had blurted out too much without asking for any favor in return. Hence, Marjorie Diehl Armstrong asked for an immunity letter for more information. When Barnes got to know about Diehl Armstrong's denials, he labeled her a liar. His house was searched for evidence and bomb-making components. In July of 2007, facing a lineup of television cameras, U.S. Attorney Mary Beth Buchanan declared that the investigation on the collar bomb robbery had concluded. Marjorie Eleanor Diehl Armstrong and Kenneth Barnes were charged as the main conspirators of the collar bomb case. A federal grand jury issued the indictments against Diehl Armstrong and Barnes for their involvement in conspiring the armed bank robbery and using a destructive device in a crime of violence. Interestingly, Brian Wells and Bill Rothstein were unindicted co-conspirators in the proceedings. With the information gathered from the countless statements and interviews the investigators took, Brian Wells was charged with being part of the bank robbery from the beginning. Brian was told that the bomb was fake, and the clue notes were to deceive the police in case of getting caught. According to the attorney Mary Beth Buchanan, the involvement of Brian Wells in the robbery escalated from him being a planner to becoming an unwilling participant. Brian Wells was betrayed by his heist mates. From acting as a hostage, he actually became one. An FBI affidavit stated that 2 witnesses confirmed Brian discussing the robbery approximately a month before it took place. On the day before the incident, the investigators believe that Brian rehearsed the bank robbery as he was spotted leaving Rothstein's house. The motive remains complex. just like the complicated plot of this incident, but it was speculated that Brian Wells was killed to minimize the number of witnesses. Diehl Armstrong was given life in prison, plus 30 years without parole, while Barnes was given 45 years in federal prison. On April 4, 2017, Diehl Armstrong died in prison. One of Brian's sisters, Barbara White, was seen calling the U.S. attorney a liar during the conference. Brian's family disregarded his involvement in the crime and believed he was forced at gunpoint. The sex worker Jessica Hupstick, whose details were found in Brian's apartment, gave her side of the story on the Netflix documentary Evil Genius, that she was the one who gave the details of Brian to the conspirators in return for drugs and money. According to her, Brian had no idea about the robbery. Despite the case being solved, the exact involvement of Brian in the case remains a mystery, but regardless of his part in the heist, at the end of the day, Brian Wells was the victim at the hands of Diehl Armstrong and the gang. What are your thoughts about this never-seen-before case of brutality? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe. See you next time with another true crime story that'll make you question mankind.